You don't expect to be betrayed by the person who calls you Mom? I certainly didn't. Not after everything I'd done for that woman. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 72 years old, and I built my life with nothing but grit and a sewing machine. My husband passed 15 years ago, leaving behind a modest business that I turned into a thriving tailoring boutique. I never remarried, never even thought to. I poured everything into my son Daniel. He was my world, my reason, the one person I trusted without hesitation. And when he brought home Clara, I tried. Lord knows I tried to love that girl. She was polished, ambitious, all the things I wasn't at her age. But something in her smile always felt just a touch too rehearsed. At first, I chalked it up to nerves, or maybe the pressure of marrying into a close-knit family. Daniel was smitten, so I smiled through it. Clara had a way of filling every room she entered, of turning even the simplest dinner into a spectacle. She took to calling me Mama L within weeks, and though it sounded sweet, I couldn't shake the chill it gave me. Still, I told myself to be grateful. So many mothers-in-law wish their daughters-in-law would make an effort. Clara certainly made an effort, especially when Daniel was watching. She brought me flowers for my birthday, asked about my blood pressure, and even offered to help out at the shop. But her offers never turned into actual help, and her visits grew shorter after the wedding. Only her curiosity about my finances stayed consistent. You see, the tailoring business had done well over the years, better than most folks in town realized. I'd invested smartly, lived frugally, and kept my books close to the chest. Daniel knew, of course. He was the executor of my estate, and I trusted him to handle things when I was gone. Clara, on the other hand, seemed increasingly interested in my plans. "Have you considered a living trust, Mama L?" she asked once, over wine at Thanksgiving. "You don't want probate dragging things out." I'd smiled politely and changed the subject. But my spine had gone stiff. That was the first time the alarm bells rang loud enough to make me take notice. And yet I said nothing, because speaking it aloud would make it real. Then came the stroke. It wasn't severe, thank God, but it slowed me down. My right hand, the one that had threaded a million needles, trembled just enough to end my sewing days. Daniel stepped in without hesitation, taking over the books, helping with the shop transition, driving me to appointments. Clara, too, played the doting daughter-in-law. She brought smoothies and essential oils and whispered that I should let them handle everything. "You just rest, Mama L," she'd say, brushing my hair back like I was a child. I felt stripped of something more than independence, like my own story was being edited out. They convinced me to let Daniel consolidate accounts for ease of access. "Temporary," they said. "Just until you're stronger." I signed the papers. 2 months later, Daniel was gone. "A heart attack," they said. 43 years old, healthy, strong, and gone in his sleep. I've heard people describe grief as a fog, but mine was a fire. It burned behind my eyes every time someone hugged me too tightly or asked if I was doing okay. Clara was the perfect widow, veiled in black, clutching his photo, accepting casseroles with watery eyes. She insisted on planning the funeral herself. "You've done enough," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Let me carry this now." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we were united in loss, but something in me clenched every time she spoke. Like her words were too smooth, too timed, too practiced. It wasn't until after the funeral that the mask began to slip. Clara moved into my home, temporarily, citing her grief and the fact that the house reminded her of Daniel. She brought her laptop, her dog, and her air of command. She set up a workspace in my sunroom and called it a healing environment. I stayed in my bedroom mostly, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't recognize my own house anymore. Clara took over the kitchen, changed the locks, and began forwarding mail to her name. When I mentioned speaking to the bank about accessing one of my CDs, she said, "Oh, I already took care of that." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she just smiled. "It's all streamlined now. You don't need to worry." The lawyer was the final straw. I overheard her on the phone late one night, her voice hushed but urgent. "We can transfer the remaining assets under the existing power of attorney. The trust will hold." I sat in the hallway in my robe, knees trembling. The words hit like stones. assets, transfer, trust. When she hung up, I confronted her. "Who were you talking to?" I demanded. She blinked, then smiled. "Just the estate attorney." "You should really rest, Mama L. All this stress isn't good for you." I locked my door that night. It didn't matter that it was my house. Nothing felt like mine anymore. And I knew then what I hadn't dared believe. Clara wasn't grieving, she was circling. I tried to reach out to the bank the next morning, but the account had been frozen due to legal transition. My name was still on it, but access had been limited pending review. I called Daniel's best friend, Marcus, a junior partner at a local law firm. He'd been one of Daniel's groomsmen and used to call me second mom. When I told him what had happened, his tone shifted from warm to steely in seconds. "She did what?" he asked. I told him everything. About the trust, the account access, the phone call I'd overheard. He promised to come over that evening. "You're not crazy," he said. "And you're not alone. I'll help." I clutched the phone like a lifeline. That night, Marcus sat at my kitchen table with a laptop and a legal pad. He reviewed every document Clara had touched since Daniel's death. "This is coordinated," he said finally. "She's setting up to claim full ownership of everything." I felt the room tilt. "But how? She can't just—" He held up a hand. "She can try, and if she gets a judge sympathetic to her story, she might succeed. Unless we stop her now." His words settled over me like a net. I wasn't just being paranoid. Clara was trying to erase me legally, piece by piece. But if she thought I was going down without a fight, she didn't know Eleanor Price. If you have a similar story about betrayal from the people you least expect, tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Marcus began by filing an emergency petition to freeze all financial transfers related to my estate. He said it wouldn't undo the damage already done, but it would stop Clara from draining the rest. "We need to move fast," he told me, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Every day we wait is a day she siphons more under the guise of legality." I felt shame burn behind my ribs. I'd signed too much, trusted too blindly. Marcus didn't blame me, though. He blamed the grief and the stroke and the trust that came from love. He drafted a letter revoking Clara's power of attorney and had me sign it on the spot. "This gives us leverage," he said, tucking the papers into his briefcase. "Now we need proof she's been misusing it." I swallowed hard and nodded. Marcus had a plan, and for the first time in weeks, I had hope. Clara noticed the shift by morning. She came down the stairs wearing silk pajamas and a fake smile, holding her smoothie like a scepter. "You're up early," she said, her eyes scanning my face. "You know, you really should rest more." I nodded and stirred my tea. "Marcus stopped by last night," I said casually. Her hand froze mid-sip. "Oh, what for?" "Just checking in. He's such a dear friend to the family." The edge in my voice was subtle, but Clara heard it. Her smile tightened and she retreated into the sunroom without another word. I watched her go and knew I'd just put her on notice. By the end of that week, Clara had retained her own lawyer. I only knew because Marcus received the notice and read it aloud over the phone. "She's going to argue you're mentally unfit to manage your own affairs," he said, voice tight. "She'll use the stroke and any medical record she can dig up to support it." My breath caught in my throat. "She's trying to have me declared incompetent?" Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, and if she succeeds, she'll gain legal control over everything indefinitely." I sat down hard in the armchair, my hand trembling worse than usual. "I'm not crazy," I whispered. "We're going to prove that," he said. "But we'll need more than your word." It was Marcus who suggested installing cameras. "Just in common areas," he assured me. "Nothing illegal, nothing hidden. Just security footage in case we need it." I agreed, though it felt strange to spy in my own home. He installed small motion-activated units in the kitchen, living room, and entryway. I told Clara they were for safety, and she rolled her eyes. "Please, Mama L, no one's breaking in here," but I noticed she started closing the sunroom door more often. Marcus also brought in a friend of his, Drive, Layla Grant, a licensed geriatric psychologist. She evaluated me over the course of 3 sessions and provided a letter confirming my full mental capacity. That letter would become our first line of defense. The footage started building a quiet case of its own. Clara spent hours on the phone, pacing and whispering, rarely mentioning Daniel anymore. She brought in boxes of documents, scanned them, and shredded them the same night. She opened my mail before I saw it. "For your convenience," she said with a wink. But the camera caught her tossing certain envelopes straight into her tote bag. Once I heard her mutter, "Just a few more weeks," to herself while pouring a glass of wine. Every clip Marcus reviewed made his jaw tighten. "She's preparing for something," he said. "Or someone. We just didn't know what, yet." Then came the insurance policy. I found it while cleaning out the drawer in Daniel's old desk, tucked between old birthday cards and business receipts. It was a life insurance document, unsigned but filled out in Daniel's handwriting. The beneficiary section had my name, not Clara's. My breath hitched when I saw the date. 3 weeks before his death. I showed Marcus immediately. "If we can find the final signed version," he said, "it could explain everything." He made calls to Daniel's insurance provider while I searched the house for more clues. And that's when I found the flash drive. It was labeled with one word, Tyrone. I didn't recognize the name, but I plugged it into Marcus's laptop with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of audio files, all time-stamped and labeled with dates. We played the first one, recorded just a month before Daniel passed. Clara's voice came through, sharp and cold. "It's not enough to wait. I need her out of the picture before the new year." My blood turned to ice. "We can't just—" Another voice, male, nervous. "Then we'll make her seem unstable," Clara snapped. "She's old. It won't be hard." Marcus paused the playback, eyes wide. "You just found our smoking gun." We played the rest of the files over 2 long days. Some were phone calls. Others were conversations recorded in person. Clara talked often about my memory lapses, my tremor, my increasing confusion. She'd been building a narrative, one she could sell in court. But what stunned me most was the mention of the trust. "Once it's all in my name," she said in one file, "I'll donate the boutique and flip the house." I sat in silence, stunned, as my life was dissected like a business transaction. Marcus labeled each file, organized them, and backed them up in triplicate. "Now we wait for her to make the next move," he said, "and when she does, we strike." She filed the petition 3 days later. Her claim? That I was no longer capable of managing my financial affairs. That my stroke had left me vulnerable to delusion and paranoia. She painted herself as my caretaker, my advocate, my only family. The court hearing was set for 2 weeks out. Marcus didn't panic, and so I didn't either. "This is where we hit back," he said, tapping the stack of evidence. "But we'll do it smart. No surprises until the hearing itself." He even brought in a videographer to compile a short courtroom presentation. "Let the judge see the story unfold with her own eyes," he said. "It's time to show Clara exactly who she's dealing with." The courthouse smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner, the kind of place that absorbs 1,000 tragedies without blinking. Clara arrived early, dressed in muted gray and clutching a thick leather binder like it held the keys to her innocence. Her makeup was flawless, her hair in a low bun, her wedding band catching the light each time she dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "She's performing," Marcus muttered as we entered, and I had to agree. Even the way she clutched her lawyer's arm screamed vulnerability. I wore Daniel's favorite brooch and a navy blazer that still held the scent of cedar from my old wardrobe. I didn't speak to Clara as we passed, but she gave me a soft, pitying smile. That was her play. Concerned daughter-in-law trying to rescue her deteriorating mother-in-law. I almost admired the audacity. Almost. But she didn't know I had a deck full of cards, and today I was playing the ace. Judge Prentice was an older woman with sharp eyes and a tighter bun than Clara's. She scanned the room, clearly used to theatrics, and determined not to indulge them. "Let's proceed," she said, and just like that, the hearing began. Clara's lawyer, a man named Nolan Graves, began with an impassioned speech about responsibility and compassion. "My client has only ever sought to protect her husband's mother in the wake of unimaginable grief," he said. "Mrs. Price's stroke, while not catastrophic, has clearly affected her capacity to manage complex finances." He presented photos of pill bottles, notes from outdated medical appointments, and statements taken out of context. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just took notes. calm as a monk. I stared straight ahead, hands folded, letting them dig their own grave. Clara nodded solemnly as her lawyer spoke, as if every word wounded her deeply. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood slowly, adjusting his glasses, his tone measured and warm. "We don't dispute that Mrs. Price suffered a mild stroke," he said. "We do, however, dispute the idea that it impaired her reasoning, memory, or independence." He introduced Dr. Grant's psychological evaluation, reading directly from her findings. Mrs. Price exhibits no signs of dementia, delusional thinking, or executive dysfunction. She remains entirely capable of managing her estate. Clara shifted in her seat, her mouth tightening. Nolan objected to the report, citing bias due to Marcus's relationship with the evaluator, but Judge Prentice allowed it. "We'll weigh all evidence accordingly," she said. Clara looked less confident after that. Then came the video footage. Marcus introduced it simply. "These are recordings from security cameras inside Mrs. Price's home, recorded over the last 3 weeks." The judge allowed the footage to be played on a monitor facing the bench. Clip after clip showed Clara rifling through drawers, shredding documents, tossing mail into her purse. One video caught her pouring my medication into the sink and replacing it with look-alike vitamins. "For your own good," her voice said in the recording. Judge Prentice's jaw tightened at that one. Clara's face drained of color, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus paused the playback and said, "This is the woman claiming to be a caregiver." It was the first time I saw fear in Clara's eyes. Then Marcus cued the audio files from the flash drive. He played the shortest one first, just 27 seconds long. In it, Clara said plainly, "I need her to seem unstable. We can't wait much longer." The voice of a man responded, "What if someone finds out?" "They won't," she replied. "She trusts me." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. Clara shot to her feet, shouting, "That's edited! That's taken out of context!" The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell. You'll have your chance to respond." Marcus didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded, as if confirming a puzzle piece had snapped into place. And then, without warning, he played the next recording. This one was longer and more damning. Clara outlined, in meticulous detail, her plan to isolate me legally. "Once the court grants me conservatorship, I'll liquidate the house and move her to a care facility," she said. "She won't even realize it's happening. By the time she figures it out, the papers will be signed." The man, who we now believe to be Tyrone, a former paralegal Clara had dated briefly, sounded uneasy. "Isn't that kind of unethical?" Clara's response chilled the room. "She's had a good run." "It's my turn now." Clara began sobbing in the courtroom, great gasping cries that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Her lawyer sat frozen, blindsided by a client who hadn't told him everything. Judge Prentice tapped her pen against her notes and said nothing. The judge called for a recess, and the moment we were outside, Clara approached me. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her voice a hushed whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far, Mama L." I said nothing. I was scared after Daniel died. I didn't know what I was doing. I met her eyes, calm and firm. "You knew exactly what you were doing, you just didn't think I'd find out." She looked like a child caught stealing candy, ashamed but not sorry. Marcus stepped between us, handing her a copy of the revocation papers. "Any further contact with my client will go through legal channels," he said. Clara turned and walked away, her heels echoing like fading guilt. Back inside, Marcus presented the insurance form I'd found in Daniel's desk. "This document, dated 3 weeks before Mr. Price's death, names Mrs. Eleanor Price as the primary beneficiary," he explained. "Though unsigned, it aligns with his other recent financial changes that suggest he was beginning to protect his mother from something." Judge Prentice examined the form, then looked at me. "Did you know about this policy before your son's death?" "No, Your Honor," I said truthfully. "I found it after, while sorting through his things." Clara's lawyer objected again, citing speculation, but the judge overruled him. "It speaks to motive," she said simply. Clara didn't speak at all. She looked like she was sinking into her seat, disappearing inch by inch. When closing arguments began, Marcus's tone was steady. "This is not the story of a woman unable to manage her life," he said. "This is the story of a grieving mother fighting to preserve her dignity in the face of betrayal." He pointed to the documents, the video clips, the audio files. "The evidence is clear. Clara Mitchell didn't seek to protect Eleanor Price. She sought to replace her." Clara didn't lift her eyes once during the final argument. Nolan Graves looked like a man calculating how quickly he could exit the courtroom without further humiliation. When Marcus sat down, he leaned over and whispered, "Now we wait." I nodded, heart thudding softly, grateful beyond words for his presence. Win or lose, the truth was finally in the open. Judge Prentice didn't make us wait long for a decision. She returned to the bench after a brief recess, legal pad in hand, and glasses perched low on her nose. "This case is unusual," she began, her voice even but firm. "Rarely do we see such extensive documentation surrounding a conservatorship petition." Clara sat up straighter, eyes bloodshot but hopeful, clinging to the last shreds of her performance. However, the judge continued, "This court cannot ignore the overwhelming evidence of premeditated manipulation and financial misconduct by the petitioner." Clara visibly flinched. "Therefore, the petition to declare Eleanor Price legally incapacitated is denied in full." My breath hitched as Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. "Furthermore," the judge went on, "this court recommends the matter be referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential elder abuse and fraud." Clara finally broke down, sobbing audibly as her lawyer lowered his head. The bailiff escorted us out as Clara's cries followed us down the hallway. My legs trembled as we stepped into the autumn sunlight, the courtroom doors closing behind us like punctuation on a nightmare. Marcus turned to me with a small, proud smile. "We did it," he said softly. I didn't speak right away. I just nodded and let the moment settle into my bones. The breeze felt fresher than it had in months, like I could finally breathe again. "She's going to fight back," I murmured, more to myself than to him. Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. "She might," he said. "But now we're armed, and she's exposed." I looked up at the courthouse windows and whispered, "Daniel would have been proud." The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, legal filings, and deep, exhausted sleep. I hadn't realized how much energy it took just to live while waiting for someone to steal your life. Clara vacated the house that same week, moving into a furnished apartment on the other side of town. I found her monogrammed pillowcase in the guest room closet and threw it out without hesitation. Marcus worked quickly to untangle what she'd already done, reversing bank consolidations, alerting credit agencies, restoring my legal autonomy. He recommended a financial advisor, a woman named Simone Grant, who was sharp as a tack and didn't flinch when I handed her a box of receipts and handwritten ledgers. "We'll clean this up," she said, tapping her iPad. "It's your money. Time to get it back where it belongs." I started sleeping with the lights off again. And for the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't wake up scared. But the fallout wasn't over yet. 2 weeks after the hearing, Clara's name reappeared, this time in a police report. Marcus called me early that morning, his voice laced with something between satisfaction and restraint. "They've charged her," he said. "Fraud, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and tampering with medical prescriptions." I sat down hard at the kitchen table. "She's being arraigned tomorrow. The DA says there may be additional charges depending on what the forensic accountant uncovers." I thought of Clara shredding documents late at night, smiling at me across the breakfast table like nothing had happened. "Will she go to jail?" I asked, not out of vengeance, but out of disbelief. Marcus was quiet for a beat. "If even half of this holds up, she won't be out any time soon." The arraignment was quieter, held in a smaller courtroom with fewer reporters than I expected. Clara looked different, thinner, tired, her confidence visibly cracked. She didn't look at me as I entered, and I didn't offer her the comfort of eye contact. Her attorney, now someone new, tried to argue that Clara had been under emotional distress after her husband's sudden death. But the prosecutor shot that down quickly, citing recorded audio of Clara planning the takeover weeks before Daniel's heart attack. "This was not a grief response," the DA said. "This was strategy." I left the courthouse before the hearing ended, unwilling to watch her fate be decided in real time. Justice is important, but sometimes too much closure can feel like reopening a wound. I walked out into the cold air and let it sting my cheeks. That sting felt like freedom. Back at home, I found comfort in the ordinary. My garden had suffered under Clara's rule: overwatered petunias, underpruned roses, and weeds that looked smug in their defiance. I dug my hands into the soil and worked until my back ached and my knees creaked. I pulled out Clara's herbal teas, her scented candles, and the sterile diffuser she'd planted in my bedroom. I replaced them with lavender sachets, my favorite wool throw, and the pillow Daniel gave me on my 70th birthday that read, "Best Mom Ever." I started baking again, just banana bread and biscuits at first, but the house began to smell like mine again. Marcus stopped by every few days with updates and pie from his sister's bakery. "You're different now," he said once, sipping coffee on my porch. "Lighter." I didn't argue. The truth didn't need defending anymore. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Clara's former employer, a real estate investment firm where she had once managed accounts. It was a polite but firm notice that they were conducting an internal investigation into her time with them. Marcus raised an eyebrow when I showed him. "Looks like your daughter-in-law might have been living a double life long before you were her target." The thought made my stomach twist. Had Daniel known any of this before he passed? Or had she hidden it from him as expertly as she tried to hide it from me? I would never know, and maybe that was a mercy. The past had already taken so much. I tucked the letter into a file and said a quiet thank you to the universe for putting Marcus in my life when it mattered most. I wasn't ready to reopen the boutique, but I began mending things around the house. A ripped slipcover, a frayed curtain, a long-forgotten patch on Daniel's old denim jacket. My fingers shook, yes, but they still remembered the rhythm of the needle. I set up a small corner of the sunroom, once Clara's self-declared healing space, with a sewing table and lamp. I kept the cameras in place, not because I expected more betrayal, but because I'd earned the right to feel safe. Each stitch was a quiet reclamation of self, and each completed hem whispered, "You are still here. You are still yours." One morning I woke up and realized I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. And yet, something tugged at the corners of my mind, something Daniel had said during our last real conversation. We'd been sitting in the backyard, watching squirrels chase each other across the fence, the sun painting golden stripes across the grass. "If something ever happens to me, Mom," he'd said suddenly, "don't let anyone rush you. Not Clara, not me, not anyone. You move when you're ready." At the time, I thought he meant grief. Now I wondered if he'd known something more. Had he sensed Clara's hunger? Had he seen the cracks in her smile before I did? I would never know, and he would never tell me now. But I carried his words with me like a compass. They pointed me back to myself. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. The official trial date for Clara's charges was set 6 weeks out, and in that time I received 2 subpoenas and 3 interview requests from local reporters. Marcus handled the subpoenas and declined the media invitations on my behalf without hesitation. "You don't owe the world your pain," he said. "You've already told the truth where it mattered." Still, the story spread faster than I expected. Whispers circling back to me from church pews, grocery aisles, and even the hairdresser's chair. Some people called to apologize for not checking on me sooner, while others dropped off casseroles like I was newly widowed all over again. I accepted their kindness, even if it came late. What Clara did had shocked the community, not because she fooled them, but because she fooled me. And around here, people respect a woman who minds her own business, but always sees what needs seeing. "You saw it too late, maybe." My neighbor Ruth said gently, "But you saw it, Elle. That's what counts." Marcus was more cautious than ever now, making sure every account had 2-factor authentication, every legal form a witness. "Clara's not just gonna lie down," he warned. "Even with charges pending, she might try something sneaky." I trusted him, but I also knew that Clara's confidence had cracked. She didn't walk like a woman who believed she'd win anymore. I still remembered her voice on those recordings, how cold and deliberate it had been. There was no way to spin what she said, not even with her crocodile tears. Still, the thought of facing her again made my stomach tighten. "We'll be ready," Marcus promised, handing me a folder of finalized estate paperwork. "No more gaps, no more risks." I thanked him, heart full of something that almost felt like peace. It was Simone, my financial advisor, who uncovered the final piece of the puzzle. She was reviewing old statements when she noticed several large ATM withdrawals in the weeks after Daniel's death. "Did you authorize these?" she asked, sliding the paper across the table. My hands shook as I read the amounts. 2,000 here, 5,000 there, always in round numbers and spaced just days apart. "No," I said firmly. "I haven't touched those accounts since before the stroke." She pursed her lips. "Then we may have another problem." Marcus confirmed that Clara had access at the time under the joint consolidation we'd done while I was recovering. "I should have caught this sooner," he muttered, angry with himself. "Don't blame yourself," I said, voice steady. "This is her mess. We just have to clean it up." The bank filed a fraud report, and that added yet another charge to Clara's growing list. This one was harder to deny. Cold, hard numbers don't lie. I imagined her sitting in her apartment, scrolling through emails, watching her future unravel, one line item at a time. She had counted on me being too old, too tired, and too trusting to notice. What she hadn't counted on was resilience. I'd survived losing a husband, raising a son alone, rebuilding after illness, and outliving most of my friends. A greedy daughter-in-law wasn't going to be what took me down. Still, I took Marcus's advice and had all the house locks changed again. Not because I was afraid, because I'd learned that caution is the currency of survival. Clara may have underestimated me once, but I'd never make the mistake of underestimating her again. The morning of the trial, I dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn at the conservatorship hearing. I pinned Daniel's brooch to my collar and stood before the mirror, steadying my breath. I didn't feel brave, but I felt ready. When Marcus pulled into my driveway, he brought with him a calm steadiness that I'd come to rely on, like breath. "You sure you want to testify?" he asked gently as we buckled into his car. "She'll try to twist your words." I nodded. Let her try. The courtroom was smaller than before, more intimate, the kind that made lies echo louder. Clara was already seated, her new attorney beside her, stone-faced and tired-looking. She didn't look at me when I walked past. The DA opened with the video evidence, the audio files, and a timeline so thorough it felt like a documentary. Every step of Clara's manipulation was laid bare, from the first forged signature to the whispered threats she never thought anyone would hear. The jury sat still as statues, eyes glued to the screen, their silence heavier than any argument. Clara didn't cry this time. She stared at the table, her hands clenched in her lap, a picture of someone who could see the walls closing in. Her attorney tried to argue duress, that Clara had acted out of desperation after Daniel's death. But the recordings predated his passing, slicing through that excuse like a blade. When I was called to the stand, I took a deep breath and climbed the 3 wooden steps without stumbling. My voice didn't shake. My truth didn't need help standing. I told them about the stroke, about the papers I signed while still foggy from medication. I told them about Clara moving into my home, taking over my accounts, controlling my calendar. I described the moment I realized I was no longer a person in my own life, but a placeholder she was trying to erase. Marcus had warned me not to get emotional, but I did anyway, quiet tears as I described Daniel's final days. "He trusted her," I said, my voice catching. "And I did too. But she betrayed that trust, not just to steal money, but to take away everything we built together." I looked directly at Clara as I said it. She didn't flinch. She just looked tired. When the verdict came, it landed like thunder. Guilty on all counts: fraud, attempted elder exploitation, financial abuse, and prescription tampering. The sentence would be decided in a few weeks, but the conviction was a weight off my chest. The DA thanked me for my courage, and Marcus hugged me in the courthouse hallway, whispering, "It's over now, Elle. You did it." I nodded, but my knees didn't stop shaking until I got home. That night, I lit a candle for Daniel, placing it in the window like I used to when he was a teenager out past curfew. I stood there a long time, watching the flame flicker in the glass. "I kept your promise," I whispered. "She didn't win. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me." The sentencing hearing came 3 weeks later, and though Marcus offered to go alone, I knew I had to be there. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just needed to see the end of the story with my own eyes. Clara entered in county-issued beige, her once glossy hair tied back, her face bare and drawn. She looked nothing like the woman who used to swirl smoothies in my kitchen, planning renovations for a home that was never hers. She didn't glance at me when she walked past, but I felt her presence like a draft in winter. The courtroom was quieter than before. No jury this time, just Judge Prentice and a handful of observers. Clara's attorney requested leniency, citing her emotional instability following Daniel's death. But the judge wasn't moved by poetic language or well-tailored pleas. "What you did," she said flatly, "was not born from grief. It was born from calculation." Clara was sentenced to 6 years, with eligibility for parole after 4 if she maintained good behavior. I didn't cheer, didn't cry, didn't feel the triumphant rush people always imagine comes with justice. Instead, I exhaled slowly, like I'd been holding my breath for months without noticing. Marcus sat beside me, one hand resting on the bench between us. "It's over now," he whispered again, and this time I believed him. Clara was escorted away without fanfare, her posture stiff, her hands cuffed in front of her. She didn't cry, not for the sentence, not for Daniel, not for the life she'd tried to steal. The courtroom emptied slowly, and when we stepped out into the cold autumn air, I felt taller, lighter, like the ghost of her intentions had finally left my home. Back at the house, I found myself wandering from room to room, no longer afraid of what I'd find. I opened drawers Clara had once guarded, scanned old receipts, photographs, even the dusty box of letters from Daniel's college years. The quiet no longer pressed in around me. It wrapped me up instead, familiar and gentle. In the sunroom, the camera still blinked softly, its little red light a reminder of how this all began. I didn't remove it. Some truths are worth preserving, even after the danger has passed. That night, I made myself a dinner of baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, just the way Daniel liked it when he came home from college. I set a place for him at the table, not out of superstition, but out of memory. I ate every bite and felt full, for once, in more ways than one. Weeks passed, and life took on a quiet rhythm I hadn't known I missed. I began accepting alterations again, slowly, only old clients, and only by word of mouth. The boutique itself stayed closed, but my sunroom became a sanctuary of thread and fabric. I mended a wedding dress for Ruth's granddaughter and hemmed choir robes for the church. Word traveled fast in our town, and soon people were leaving notes in my mailbox asking if I could just take a look at a zipper or sleeve. I said yes more often than no. My hands were steadier than they had been in months, and every finished piece felt like a small act of healing. Marcus came by regularly, sometimes with legal paperwork, sometimes with coffee, and once with a puppy he swore was just visiting. The little mutt, a scruffy gray terrier named Button, never left. Button quickly became the shadow I never asked for, but now couldn't imagine being without. He followed me from room to room, napping on fabric scraps and barking at the mailman like it was a sacred duty. He didn't care about inheritance or power of attorney, just breakfast and belly rubs. I found myself laughing more, especially when he tried to climb into the laundry basket or chase the broom like it owed him money. "You're ridiculous," I told him one morning as he spun in circles after his own tail. But ridiculousness had its place, especially after so much sorrow. Marcus built him a little gate to keep him out of the sewing space, which Button learned to jump within 2 days. I didn't mind. Chaos was better than emptiness. Life, even messy life, was a kind of music I hadn't heard in too long. It was Simone who suggested I speak at the local women's center. "You don't have to tell everything," she said gently. "Just enough to remind people they aren't alone." At first, I refused. I didn't want to be anyone's inspiration. But one night, I found myself writing notes on an index card, bullet points of betrayal, recovery, and rediscovery. I showed up a week later with my story folded into my purse, unsure if I'd actually read it. The room was filled with women of all ages, some younger than Clara, some older than me. When I stood up to speak, I didn't read from the card. I spoke from the scar. I told them how easily trust could be twisted and how hard it is to admit when someone you love doesn't love you back the same way. When I finished, no one clapped. They just nodded. That was enough. Winter came, blanketing the town in snow, and for the first time since Daniel's death, I hosted Christmas dinner. Ruth brought sweet potato casserole, Marcus brought cider and his sister's famous pie, and Button wore a ridiculous red bow tie he refused to keep straight. We ate around the same table where Clara once insisted on centerpiece arrangements and gold-rimmed plates. This year we used mismatched dishes and paper napkins decorated with dancing reindeer. No one complained. I told stories about Daniel as a boy, how he used to pretend the snow shovel was a knight's sword, how he built forts that collapsed in 10 minutes, and how he once tried to microwave a candy cane because he wanted it bendy. Everyone laughed, even me. Especially me. And that night, I didn't light a candle for Daniel. I just said his name aloud and let him be part of the joy again. The letters started coming in January. Some were from women who had heard me speak, others from local folks who'd followed the court case through whispers and headlines. They shared their own stories of greedy stepchildren, deceptive caregivers, estranged relatives with smooth hands and cold hearts. Some thanked me. Others asked for advice. I didn't answer all of them, but I read every single word. Pain loves company, but so does hope. And I found myself writing again. Small essays, handwritten notes, sometimes just a paragraph on what healing really feels like. It doesn't come like thunder. I wrote once. It comes like a steady rain that washes you clean, one drop at a time. One afternoon, Marcus knocked on my door holding an envelope instead of pie. "You have been officially cleared as executor of Daniel's estate," he said, handing it over. "No more holds, no more red tape." I opened the envelope with steady fingers, reading the words I'd been waiting to see since Clara first darkened my doorstep. "It's yours again," Marcus said gently. "Every account, every document, every inch of peace." I nodded, too moved to speak. Button barked once, then curled up at my feet like punctuation. Daniel's signature was at the bottom of the paperwork, dated a month before he died. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew she would try something." Marcus didn't argue. He just said, "And he knew you'd stop her." Spring came late that year, with frost clinging to the windows until April, and the tulips blooming in defiance anyway. I spent the mornings in the garden with Button, trotting beside me, chasing bees and barking at butterflies like they were personal insults. Life had become quieter, softer, less about what I had lost, and more about what I was still building. I didn't reopen the boutique, but I began teaching sewing classes at the community center once a week. 12 women and 2 brave men showed up to my first session, each carrying frayed jeans, torn dresses, and the same shy kind of hope. We patched fabric, told stories, drank cheap coffee, and laughed more than we sewed. "It's not just about fixing clothes," I told them once. "It's about reminding yourself that broken doesn't mean ruined." They nodded, and I realized some lessons don't need to be taught. They just need to be spoken. By the 3rd session, someone brought muffins, and someone else brought their neighbor. Marcus visited every Friday, still protective even though Clara was now 4 months into her sentence. We never spoke about her in detail anymore. There was nothing left to analyze, no twists left to unravel. But sometimes he'd mention court updates or her lawyer's quiet attempts to reduce the sentence, which Judge Prentice denied each time. "She hasn't shown remorse," the judge had said once, according to Marcus. And rehabilitation requires reflection, not excuses. Clara had tried writing me once, an apology that arrived folded inside a blank greeting card. It was short, vague, and empty. I shredded it without reading past the first sentence. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, especially when the fire was deliberate. I'd thought often about Daniel and what he might say if he were here to see all this. He would have hated the trial, the betrayal, the drawn-out courtrooms and depositions, but he would have been proud of how I handled it. I imagined him watching from somewhere unseen, arms crossed, that familiar lopsided grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd always teased me about being old-school tough and I finally understood what he meant. Strength isn't loud, it's persistent. It's knowing when to fight and when to heal. I kept his photo on my bedside table, right next to a vase of whatever flowers Button hadn't dug up that week. Sometimes I'd speak to the photo without thinking. Just little things. What the weather was like, what I was working on, how Button refused to sleep anywhere but on the laundry pile. Those moments made me feel less alone. The town slowly stopped whispering about me and started waving again. I got more invitations to church picnics, birthday parties, and even the retirement luncheon for the librarian who'd once told Daniel to stop chewing gum at the reference desk. I went when I felt like it, and I didn't apologize when I didn't. I'd earned the right to pick my piece. Ruth came over often, helping with the garden and gossiping about everyone who crossed her path. She'd bring over peach cobbler and pretend it was a trade for one of my lemon cakes, though we both knew she'd win that barter every time. "You still have more life to live, Elle," she said one afternoon while pulling weeds. "You just have to choose how loud you want it to be." I thought about that long after she left. In May, Simone called to let me know the forensic audit of Clara's financial activity had concluded. "There's still a small sum unaccounted for," she explained, "but nothing worth pursuing through civil court." I asked her to donate whatever was recovered to the women's shelter, the same one where I'd given my first talk. It was never about the money, I told her. It was about making sure she didn't get to rewrite my life. Simone paused before saying, "She didn't. You did." That night, I sat on the porch with Button curled at my feet, a blanket over both our laps. The stars were clearer than they had been in months. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. One morning in early June, Marcus arrived with a small, wrapped box and a sheepish smile. "Don't get excited." "It's not pie," he said as he placed it in my hands. Inside was a delicate silver thimble engraved with the words, "Still mending." I blinked back tears as I turned it over in my fingers. "It reminded me of you," he said, shrugging. "You didn't break, you just stitched yourself back together differently." I didn't say anything at first, just stood and hugged him hard. "Thank you," I whispered, "for the fight, for the friendship, for never letting go." He chuckled. "Well, someone had to keep up with Button's legal affairs." Button, for his part, had become something of a neighborhood legend. Children knocked on my door just to pet him, and Ruth swore he barked in full sentences when annoyed. He took to sitting in the window with a toy in his mouth, watching the street like a guard dog, whose only threat was being too adorable. I added his name to my home insurance policy just for fun, and Marcus framed the paperwork like it was a diploma. To Eleanor, Price, and Button, he read aloud, "Legal residents and co-defenders of the estate." Laughter, I was learning, could be a kind of medicine too. It didn't erase the past, but it softened its edges. And in a life that had once felt sharpened by grief, softness was worth treasuring. There were days when I still felt the ache of everything I'd lost, when the quiet became too loud, or when I caught myself setting out 2 teacups by habit. But those days didn't define me anymore. They were just part of the fabric. Like worn patches on a favorite quilt, still useful, still beautiful, just honest about where they'd been. I let the sadness come when it needed to, and I let it pass without shame. I knew now that healing wasn't about pretending, it was about continuing. And continue I did, one stitch, one step, one morning at a time. Always forward, always a little stronger. Late that summer, the community center asked if I would teach a longer workshop, 6 weeks of sewing and storytelling for women starting over. I hesitated at first, unsure if I had that kind of energy left in me, but Button gave me his usual bark of approval, so I said yes. The class filled quickly, and not all of them were locals. Word had spread about the, quote, "widow with the stitches that saved her life." That title made me laugh, but in some ways, it wasn't wrong. The women came in like patchwork pieces themselves, frayed, torn, but full of color and stories. Some were recovering from divorce, others from illness, a few from losses they couldn't put into words. We didn't fix everything, but we repaired what we could, fabric and otherwise. There was comfort in threading needles together, in sharing quiet moments with people who understood sorrow without having to name it. The community center gave us the biggest room by the window, And every Wednesday it smelled like coffee, lavender oil, and hope. "You're building more than hems in here," Ruth said one day when she dropped off muffins. "You're stitching people back to themselves." One afternoon, as the workshop wrapped up, a young woman named Mia stayed behind. She was barely 30, with hands that trembled when they held scissors and eyes that never quite made full contact. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly as I folded up fabric swatches. I nodded, motioning for her to sit. "How did you know she was doing it?" "Clara, I mean. When someone close to you is hurting you without leaving bruises, how do you finally see it?" The question caught me off guard. I sat down slowly, heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "You don't always see it right away," I told her gently. "Sometimes you just feel smaller around them, like your life is being edited piece by piece." She nodded, eyes wet. I didn't push for details. Some stories don't need telling to be understood. Mia started coming to my house on Saturdays, just for an hour or two. She'd help me water the garden, untangle thread, or sit with Button while he barked at squirrels like it was his full-time job. Slowly, her laughter came easier, her posture straighter. She reminded me of Clara sometimes, not in her behavior, but in her potential to be more than what life had tried to mold her into. I never asked who she was hiding from, and she never volunteered. But there was healing in the silence, too. Ruth took to calling her the quiet one, and Mia never corrected her. By the end of August, she brought her own sewing basket and started teaching another woman how to hem a skirt. "You've got the hands of a healer," I told her once. She blinked, then smiled softly and said, "So do you." In September, I finally sold the boutique building. It had sat empty too long, and I knew I wasn't going back to that kind of work. Marcus helped me finalize the paperwork, and the buyer, a young couple opening a bookstore and coffee shop, promised to keep the original sign and repaint the trim the same robin's egg blue. "We want to keep the history," the wife said, eyes bright with plans. I left them with the original blueprint, a photo of me and Daniel on the day we opened, and a note, "Make something honest here." The closing brought back a twinge of grief, but not regret. Life is layers, after all, and some chapters are best preserved rather than prolonged. I used a portion of the sale to fund the community center's new arts program, and the rest went into a scholarship fund for women aging out of transitional housing. "You're turning pain into policy," Marcus said when I told him. "No," I replied. "I'm just making sure no one gets erased like she tried to erase me." That fall, Judge Prentice invited me to speak at a legal ethics seminar for young attorneys. I nearly laughed when I got the letter. "Me? What do I know about legal ethics?" I asked Marcus, waving the invitation. He grinned. "You know what happens when someone doesn't have any." So I went, stood behind a podium in a hotel ballroom, and told my story to a crowd of wide-eyed interns and seasoned litigators alike. I kept it simple. Trust can be weaponized, and power of attorney is not a license to steal a life. I told them about the paperwork I signed when my hands still shook, and the pills Clara replaced when I wasn't watching. I didn't name-call or dramatize. I just showed them what real harm looks like when it wears pearls and calls you Mama L. The applause was quiet but respectful. One woman even asked for a copy of my speech to share with her team. That winter, Clara filed for parole. Marcus called me the day the petition landed in the system. "She's eligible but not guaranteed," he said carefully. "They'll notify you if she's approved." I stood by the kitchen window, Button asleep at my feet, the air outside dusted with snow. "What if she reaches out again?" I asked, though I already knew what I would do. "She might," Marcus said, "but the system knows her now. You're not invisible anymore, Eleanor." That meant more than any legal victory. I'd spent months wondering if I was being paranoid, only to learn that I'd been underestimated. "Let her try," I said finally. I'm not the same woman she left behind. The parole board denied her request. Lack of remorse, evidence of premeditation, and, quote, an ongoing failure to demonstrate meaningful accountability. Clara remained incarcerated, her next eligibility hearing pushed out another 18 months. I didn't celebrate. I just noted the date and went on with my day. Mia brought over cinnamon rolls and a scarf she'd knitted herself, all uneven rows and stubborn charm. For winter, she said, wrapping it around my neck like a proud little sister. Button wagged his tail at the sugary scent and promptly stole one roll when no one was looking. The house was warm, full, and mine again. Not just in name, in spirit. One snowy morning, I found a letter tucked into the community center's mailbox. It had no return address and no signature, just a short message in blocky handwriting. You saved more than just yourself. I stared at the words, reading them again and again. I had no way of knowing who wrote it. Mia, maybe, or someone from the seminar or workshop. But it didn't matter. The message was true. My voice, once nearly taken from me, had become a lighthouse for others. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that what I had been through might matter beyond just survival. Not every storm leaves you ruined. Some just wash you clean. By the time spring returned, Mia had officially taken over the Wednesday workshop at the community center. She ran it with a quiet grace that reminded me of wildflowers. Sturdy, understated, and blooming when no one expected. I still stopped by sometimes, mostly to drop off fabric donations or sit in the back with Button curled at my feet. The women lit up when Mia entered the room, their needles slowing just enough to greet her with warmth and laughter. She always gave me a knowing smile, the kind of smile shared by people who had walked through fire and made it out with something still intact. Ruth said it best. That girl's learning how to grow after being buried. And I knew, without being told, that Mia's scars came from more than fabric she couldn't fix. I never pressed her for details. She would tell me when she was ready, if she ever needed to. It was enough to see her sewing, smiling, and standing tall in a room she once entered like a shadow. And in that way, her story became part of mine. One afternoon in early April, Marcus stopped by with papers in hand and an odd look on his face. "Got something you'll want to see," he said, setting the envelope on the kitchen table between us. It was another letter from Clara, this time through official prison channels, reviewed, logged, and cleared by the system before reaching my hands. "Do I have to read it?" I asked, eyeing it like it might bite. "No," he said gently, "but I thought you'd want to know she's still trying." I slid the envelope toward me, opened it, and unfolded the paper. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Tight, sharp, trying to control the page. "I've been reflecting," it began, "and I understand now that what I did was wrong." There were no specifics. No admission of what exactly she had done. Just a blanket apology coded in vague remorse. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and handed it to Marcus. "File it," I said. "I've moved on." Later that week, I found myself in the sunroom again, surrounded by sunlight and the sound of birds returning to the garden. Button napped near the open window, snoring softly, his little body rising and falling with contentment. I picked up a patchwork quilt I'd started a year ago, the one I abandoned when everything began unraveling. It was meant to be a gift for Daniel's birthday, a collage of old shirts, childhood blankets, and fabric from the boutique. I hadn't touched it since the week before his heart gave out. Stitch by stitch, I began again, not to finish what I'd started, but to honor who I'd been when I started it. Some seams had frayed. Some squares were uneven. But that's what memory is. It's not always symmetrical, but it still holds warmth. By evening, I had stitched more than I had in months. The quilt became my quiet project, something I worked on between garden days, workshop visits, and long walks with Button. I didn't rush. I let it grow like healing does, slowly, honestly, and with space to breathe. Marcus saw it once and smiled, touching one square stitched from an old flannel shirt. "That was Daniel's favorite," he said. "He wore that thing every Thanksgiving." I nodded, pressing the seam flat. "He spilled gravy on it 3 years in a row." We laughed, and for a moment it felt like Daniel was in the room, somewhere between the stitches and the sunlight. I didn't cry. Not that day. Grief had finally become a companion instead of an intruder. In late May, a reporter from a regional paper reached out, asking to do a feature on elder abuse prevention and survivors. She'd heard about the court case, the seminar, and the workshops, and wanted to profile the town's accidental advocate. I almost declined, worried it would dredge up too much, but Marcus encouraged me to reconsider. "You've helped people already," he said. This just puts a microphone in front of what you've already been whispering. So I agreed, under one condition, that the story center not on what was done to me, but what I'd done after. The interview took place in my garden, the flowers blooming around us like punctuation marks. I spoke carefully, not naming Clara but not shielding her either. The article ran 2 weeks later, titled, "She Stitched Herself Back Together." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind being seen. That summer was filled with things I never thought I'd do again. I went to a bluegrass concert in the park with Ruth, stayed out past sunset, and didn't worry once about what might go wrong. I made lemon bars for the church bake sale, even though mine always cracked in the middle. I let Mia take over the garden one Saturday and came outside to find herbs growing where roses used to be. "Fresh starts," she said. "Even plants need them." Marcus invited me to dinner with his sister's family, where Button made himself at home on the couch like he'd been born into it. We laughed, shared stories, and I didn't flinch when someone mentioned Clara's name in passing. Time had done its job. I still carried the past, but it didn't carry me anymore. As the leaves began to change, I decided it was time to do something with the letters I'd received from other women. I'd kept everyone, folded neatly, stored in a cedar box beneath my bed, stories of betrayal, theft, emotional harm, and the long, slow journey back to self. I sorted them into piles, not by tragedy, but by turning point. When they said no, when they asked for help, when they decided to fight. And I realized then that the most powerful part of any story is the moment someone chooses themselves. I started writing again, not letters, but chapters. Not about Clara, or even Daniel, but about all the women like me who chose to reclaim their lives. One seam at a time. Mia read the first draft and cried when she handed it back. "You're going to help so many people," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "You already have. But this gives them a map." I didn't know if the book would ever be published, or if it even mattered. What mattered was that I had said it, written it, named it. I had taken back the story Clara tried to steal and made something useful out of it. Not just for me, but for anyone who needed to know they weren't alone. And that was enough. By early autumn, the manuscript was finished. A neat stack of pages resting on my kitchen table beside a half-drunk cup of tea and Button's favorite chewed-up tennis ball. I titled it "The Thread That Didn't Break," not just for myself, but for every woman whose story I'd carried in that cedar box. Mia helped format it into a clean draft, and Marcus connected me with a local publisher who specialized in memoirs and community advocacy. I didn't expect anything to come from it, not really, but a month later they called to say they wanted to publish. "It's not just a story, Mrs. Price," the editor told me. "It's a roadmap. It's what people need." I didn't cry, but I did sit in the sunroom for a long time afterward, staring out at the garden, letting the moment settle like mist on a morning lawn. Daniel would have teased me about becoming an author. He would have said something ridiculous like, "Next stop, Oprah's couch," just to make me blush. The first print run was small, just 500 copies, but they sold out within weeks. The community center hosted a reading in the same room where I'd first taught that workshop, and every seat was filled. Ruth introduced me with tears in her eyes and a note card she never looked at once. Mia stood in the back, arms crossed, pride written all over her face. I read one chapter aloud, the one about the night Clara whispered over the phone, plotting how to erase me. The room was silent, every breath held tight in the chest of someone who'd maybe, once, been there too. I didn't read for applause, but I got it anyway. Afterward, a young woman approached me, barely 20, voice shaking as she said, "I thought I was crazy, but now I think I'm just waking up." I hugged her gently. That was the moment I knew the book had already done everything I needed it to. As the holidays approached, the days grew shorter, but the light in my home never dimmed. Marcus installed fairy lights in the sunroom for no reason other than, "You deserve some sparkle, Elle." Button kept watch over every baked good that came through the door, often nabbing corners of cookies when no one was watching. Mia brought over a wreath she made herself, pine cones, cinnamon sticks, and tiny fabric hearts stitched by hand. We hung it on the front door and stood back to admire it like it was a painting in a museum. "You made a home again," she said, her voice soft. Not just for you, for all of us. I didn't correct her. She was right. My house wasn't just a place. It was a safe harbor, one that had been nearly lost, but reclaimed stitch by stitch. This time, no one would take it. A week before Christmas, I got a call from the district attorney's office. Clara had submitted another letter, this time not to me, but to the parole board, another attempt at early release. They wanted me to be aware, in case I wished to submit a statement. Marcus read the letter for me and said it was more of the same. Surface apologies, no real ownership. She still doesn't get it, he said. I thought about it for a full day before writing a statement. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I kept it simple. Actions have consequences. Forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. This story belongs to me now. Let it stay that way. The board rejected her petition unanimously. I slept soundly that night. Christmas Day was quiet and full. Ruth brought cranberry bread, Mia made sweet potato gratin, and Marcus arrived with a roast and a gift bag labeled for Button and his chef. We ate at the dining table under soft candlelight, with snow beginning to fall just outside the window. Button wore a red sweater Ruth had knitted him, tail wagging with joy each time someone said his name. We told stories, some new, some well-worn, and laughed like people who had earned the right to feel joy again. When the meal ended, we sat around the living room, sipping cider, passing around photos, and avoiding any talk of the past we didn't want to reopen. It wasn't denial. It was choice. And that choice felt like freedom. Later that evening, as the house quieted, I returned to the sunroom with a fresh cup of tea and Button nestled at my feet. The quilt I'd made for Daniel was draped across the back of the couch, now complete, every seam intact. I lit a single candle, set it beside his photo, and whispered, I kept my promise. Outside, the snow dusted the garden beds like powdered sugar, the fairy lights glowing just faintly beneath the frost. I didn't feel haunted anymore. I felt held. Not by grief, not by revenge, but by the life I'd fought to reclaim. And in that warmth, I found peace again. The weeks that followed were quiet in the best way. The book continued to spread, picked up by small advocacy networks, libraries, and support groups around the state. I started getting letters from women I'd never met, calling me things I never thought I'd be: strong, brave, hopeful. I didn't feel like any of those things most days. I just felt honest, and maybe that's what mattered more. Truth, after all, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. I responded to each letter slowly, handwritten, sometimes just a line or two. You're not broken, you're just still stitching. That became my signature. One morning in February, Mia knocked on my door with red cheeks and a nervous smile. I have news, she said. I've been offered a job at a women's shelter out in Colorado. Sewing therapy, emotional support, trauma recovery. I felt my heart rise and ache all at once. That's perfect for you, I said, and I meant it. She stayed for tea, and we talked logistics, when she'd leave, how long she'd stay, what to do with the sewing room she'd helped me build. It'll always be here, I told her. A place to come back to, just like you did. We didn't cry, though our eyes were wet. We'd learned, together, that letting go didn't mean losing. On her last day in town, Mia left me a note tucked into the seam of a pillow she'd helped stitch the first week we met. I found it that evening, just as the sun dipped low, painting the walls gold. Thank you for saving me without asking me to explain. That was all it said. That was enough. I tucked the note into the cedar box, alongside the letters and folded hope I had gathered since Clara's shadow first passed through my life. The box wasn't a monument to pain anymore. It was a record of every hand that reached out when the world tried to erase them, including mine. I'm 73 now. My hair's more silver than gray, my hands still tremble when tired, and Button has gone a bit deaf in one ear. But we're here. We're whole. And the life I lead is one I made, claimed, and filled with people who never ask me to shrink. The garden blooms, the wind sings through the screen door. And when I look in the mirror now, I see someone who didn't just survive, but rewrote the ending, stitch by stitch, day by day, and no one will ever take that from me again. Thank you for listening to my story. Before you leave, there's another story similar to the one you just watched. You'll see it on the top left of your screen.